In the treacherous courts of Renaissance Italy, where a single misstep could mean exile or death, Niccolò Machiavelli observed the rise and fall of princes, the machinations of courtiers, and the delicate dance of power that determined who commanded respect and who became a victim of circumstance. His insights, forged in the crucible of political intrigue and human ambition, reveal timeless principles that separate those who are revered from those who are exploited. The young Lorenzo de' Medici once asked his advisor why some rulers inspired unwavering loyalty while others, despite their wealth and noble birth, found themselves surrounded by sycophants who would abandon them at the first sign of trouble. The answer lay not in birthright or fortune, but in the mastery of fundamental principles that govern human nature and the dynamics of respect. These principles, when understood and applied, create an invisible armor that protects against manipulation while commanding genuine admiration. The merchant Giovanni Tornabuoni learned his first lesson in respect the hard way. As a young man managing his family's banking interests in Florence, he prided himself on his generosity and willingness to accommodate every request. When fellow merchants asked for extended credit terms, he readily agreed. When clients requested favors beyond their business relationship, he obliged without hesitation. His reputation as a good man spread throughout the city, but so did something else, the understanding that Giovanni could be easily swayed, that his word was flexible, and that his boundaries were mere suggestions. Within 2 years, Tornabuoni found himself drowning in bad debts, his reputation tarnished not by his failures but by his successes in being accommodating. Clients who had once praised his kindness now spoke of him as weak, unreliable, and unworthy of serious consideration. It was then that he encountered the writings of Machiavelli and began to understand the paradox of respect. Kindness without strength breeds contempt, while strength without cruelty commands admiration. The foundation of respect begins with the establishment of clear, inviolable boundaries. These boundaries are not walls built to keep others out, but rather the defining lines that communicate who you are and what you stand for. When the Duke of Urbino, Guidobaldo da Montefeltro, ruled his territory, he was known for 3 immutable rules. His word, once given, was absolute, those who served him loyally were protected at all costs, and betrayal was met with swift, decisive consequences. These were not harsh dictates born of cruelty, but natural laws that governed his realm as surely as gravity governs falling objects. The psychology behind respect is rooted in predictability and strength. Humans, driven by their ancient survival instincts, instinctively defer to those who demonstrate consistent power and reliability. When someone knows that crossing you will result in specific, unavoidable consequences, they begin to calculate the cost of their actions. This calculation breeds caution, and caution breeds respect. Conversely, when boundaries are flexible, when consequences are uncertain or absent, others learn that they can push further with minimal risk. Consider the case of Isabella d'Este, Marchioness of Mantua, who ruled one of the most prosperous and respected courts in Italy. When the powerful Cesare Borgia demanded tribute and threatened invasion, Isabella did not respond with either cowering submission or reckless defiance. Instead, she demonstrated what Machiavelli called the virtue of the fox. She acknowledged Borgia's power while making it clear that taking Mantua would cost him more than the victory was worth. She had prepared her city's defenses, secured alliances with other Italian states, and, most importantly, had cultivated a reputation for keeping her word that made other rulers willing to support her. The principle at work here transcends mere military strategy. Isabella understood that respect is earned through the demonstration of capability combined with restraint. She showed that she could fight, but preferred diplomacy. She proved she could make life difficult for her enemies, but chose to reward friendship. This combination of visible strength and measured response created what Machiavelli termed the perfect terror, not fear of cruelty, but recognition of consequence. The establishment of personal authority follows similar patterns in every human relationship, whether in the corridors of power or the mundane interactions of daily life. When Antonio Salviati, a young clerk in the Florentine bureaucracy, first began his career, he made the mistake that destroys many promising individuals: he tried to be liked by everyone. He worked overtime without complaint, took on tasks that belonged to others, and never expressed disagreement with his superiors' decisions, even when those decisions were clearly flawed. Initially, his supervisors praised his dedication, but, as months passed, Antonio noticed a troubling pattern. Important projects were assigned to others. His opinions were rarely sought. When he did speak up, his words carried little weight. He had become the office workhorse, useful, reliable, but ultimately replaceable and unremarkable. The respect he craved had been sacrificed on the altar of agreeability. The transformation began when Antonio studied the career of Niccolò Soderini, a contemporary who had risen rapidly through the same bureaucratic ranks. Soderini's approach was markedly different. He was known for three characteristics: he delivered exceptional work, he stood by his professional judgments even when they were unpopular, and he never promised what he could not deliver. When Soderini disagreed with a superior's decision, he presented his case once, clearly and respectfully, then executed the decision with full commitment if overruled. When he committed to a deadline, he met it without fail. When he identified a problem, he came armed with solutions. Most importantly, Soderini had learned the art of selective engagement. He did not involve himself in every office dispute or offer help for every minor task. His energy was reserved for matters that truly mattered, which made his involvement in any project a signal of its importance. This scarcity of attention increased its value, making colleagues compete for his participation rather than taking it for granted. The principle underlying Soderini's success reflects a fundamental truth about human psychology: we value what is scarce and devalue what is abundant. When someone is always available, always agreeable, always willing to bend, they become like air, essential for survival but noticed only when absent. The person who establishes clear parameters around their time, energy, and commitments creates a different dynamic entirely. Their attention becomes a commodity, their agreement a prize, their respect something that must be earned rather than assumed. This does not mean adopting an attitude of artificial scarcity or becoming needlessly difficult. The goal is not to be contrary for its own sake, but to ensure that your choices and commitments carry weight. When you say yes to something, it should be meaningful because you also have the capacity to say no. When you offer help, it should be valuable because you do not offer it indiscriminately. When you give your word, it should be trusted completely because you do not give it lightly. The merchant prince Cosimo de' Medici exemplified this principle throughout his rise to unofficial leadership of Florence. Despite immense wealth and political influence, Cosimo was known for his careful consideration of every commitment. He would listen to requests with attention and respect, ask clarifying questions, and then provide a clear answer. If he agreed to support someone's cause, that person could count on his full resources. If he declined, he explained his reasoning without elaborate justification or false promises of future consideration. This approach served multiple purposes. First, it ensured that Cosimo's commitments were sustainable and effective. He never overextended himself or made promises he could not keep. Second, it created a reputation for reliability that made his word more valuable than written contracts. Third, it forced others to think carefully about what they asked of him, leading to more serious and worthwhile requests. The psychological impact was profound. Those who received Cosimo's support knew they had earned something significant. Those who were declined could not claim they had been misled or treated carelessly. Most importantly, everyone who interacted with him learned that he was a person of substance whose decisions were based on careful consideration rather than impulse or the desire to please. Building this foundation requires what Machiavelli called the discipline of the lion, the cultivation of inner strength that allows you to remain unmoved by the various pressures and manipulations that others will inevitably attempt. This inner strength manifests in several specific behaviors that communicate your unshakable nature to the world around you. The first is emotional consistency. People respect those who do not fluctuate wildly in their reactions to circumstances. When Caterina Sforza defended her fortress of Rabaldino against Cesare Borgia, she maintained the same composed demeanor whether receiving news of victory or setback. Her captains and soldiers learned to read the situation from her strategic decisions rather than her emotional state, which remained steady regardless of external pressure. This consistency bred confidence in her leadership and made her enemies uncertain about her true position, as they could not gauge her desperation or relief from her behavior. Emotional consistency does not mean emotional absence. It means that your emotional responses are proportionate, appropriate, and under your conscious control. When someone attempts to provoke you into an overreaction, your measured response communicates strength. When others panic in crisis, your calm signals capability. When good fortune comes your way, your steady appreciation rather than wild celebration suggests that you are accustomed to success and expect it to continue. The second manifestation of inner strength is intellectual integrity, the commitment to truth and logic over convenience and flattery. Federico da Montefeltro, Duke of Urbino, was renowned throughout Europe not only for his military prowess but for his honest counsel. When other rulers sought his advice, they knew they would receive his genuine assessment rather than words crafted to please them. This reputation made his friendship valuable and his enmity dangerous, as his opinions carried weight with other leaders. Intellectual integrity requires the courage to disagree when disagreement is warranted, to point out flaws in reasoning even when doing so is uncomfortable, and to acknowledge your own mistakes when they occur. It means researching your positions thoroughly, admitting the limits of your knowledge, and changing your mind when presented with better evidence. These behaviors signal to others that you are someone who can be trusted to provide accurate information and sound judgment, making your opinion worth seeking and your counsel worth following. The third element is what might be called principled flexibility, the ability to adapt your methods while remaining true to your core values. When Lorenzo the Magnificent negotiated with the Pope, he demonstrated this quality by showing willingness to compromise on procedural matters while refusing to bend on issues that touched his fundamental commitments to Florence's independence. This approach showed his negotiating partners that he was reasonable and practical, but also that certain lines could not be crossed regardless of pressure or incentive. Principled flexibility prevents others from painting you as either rigidly stubborn or weakly accommodating. Instead, it establishes you as someone who can work within constraints but cannot be fundamentally altered by them. This balance makes you a valuable ally, as partners know you will find creative solutions to problems, and a formidable opponent, as enemies understand that certain tactics simply will not work against you. The development of these qualities requires consistent practice and self-awareness. Like physical strength, inner strength must be built gradually through progressively challenging exercises. Begin with small commitments and honor them completely. Practice expressing disagreement in low-stakes situations before major conflicts arise. Set boundaries in minor interactions to develop the skill before facing significant pressure. Most importantly, study your own patterns of weakness. When do you typically bend when you should stand firm? What types of pressure are most effective at moving you away from your principles? Which people or situations trigger your desire to be liked rather than respected? Understanding these vulnerabilities allows you to prepare for them and develop specific strategies to maintain your integrity when tested. The foundation of respect, once established, becomes a platform upon which all other influence and achievement can be built. But this foundation is not a destination, it is the beginning of a more sophisticated understanding of how to navigate the complex world of human relationships while maintaining your essential dignity and power. Part 2, The Architecture of Influence. Count Alessandro de' Bardi learned the second great principle during a seemingly minor incident that would reshape his understanding of power forever. As a young courtier in the service of the Duke of Florence, Alessandro possessed all the traditional markers of influence: noble birth, extensive education, and considerable wealth. Yet he found himself consistently outmaneuvered by a fellow courtier, Marco Vettori, whose family was of modest origins and whose formal education was unremarkable. The incident occurred during negotiations over trade agreements with Venice. Alessandro had prepared extensively, marshalling impressive arguments about Florence's economic interests and the historical precedents for the terms he proposed. His presentation was eloquent, logical, and thoroughly researched. Marco's approach was entirely different. Rather than arguing for specific terms, he asked a series of questions that led the Venetian negotiators to recognize problems in their own position that they had not previously considered. By the end of the session, the Venetians were asking Marco what he thought would be fair terms, effectively allowing him to dictate the negotiations' outcome. Alessandro initially dismissed this as luck, but, as he observed more carefully, he began to recognize a pattern. Marco never demanded respect, he earned it by demonstrating value. He never argued for his position, he guided others to discover his position as the logical solution to their problems. He never threatened or coerced, he created situations where cooperation with him was clearly the optimal choice for all parties involved. This represented the second great principle that separates those who command genuine respect from those who are merely tolerated or feared: the cultivation of indispensability through competence and wisdom. While the first principle establishes your boundaries and demonstrates your strength, the second transforms you from someone who cannot be pushed around into someone whose presence improves every situation they enter. The foundation of this transformation lies in what Machiavelli termed the virtue of the eagle, the ability to see patterns and possibilities that others miss. This elevated perspective allows you to provide value that others cannot replicate, making your insights and contributions essential rather than merely useful. Like the eagle soaring above the landscape, you must develop the capacity to observe the broader picture while others remain focused on immediate concerns. Leonardo da Vinci exemplified this principle throughout his career. Whether serving Ludovico Sforza in Milan or Cesare Borgia in Romagna, Leonardo's value lay not in his willingness to please or his political connections, but in his unique ability to solve problems that others considered impossible. When Sforza needed to move massive amounts of marble for his architectural projects, Leonardo designed innovative transportation systems. When military engineers claimed a particular fortification could not be breached, Leonardo identified 3 different methods of assault. His indispensability was rooted in competence so distinctive that replacing him was practically impossible. The cultivation of such competence requires a systematic approach to learning and skill development that goes far beyond the minimum requirements of your current situation. You must become a student of patterns, understanding not just what happens, but why it happens and how different variables interact to create specific outcomes. This deeper knowledge allows you to predict consequences that others cannot foresee and to propose solutions that address root causes rather than merely symptoms. Francesco Dadini, the merchant of Prato, built one of Europe's most extensive trading networks not through aggressive competition or political manipulation, but through his unmatched understanding of market patterns and human behavior. While other merchants focused on maximizing profit from individual transactions, Dadini studied the broader rhythms of commerce. He noticed that certain goods commanded premium prices in specific locations during predictable seasons. He observed that particular political events in distant cities would create opportunities or threats months before they became apparent to local merchants. This pattern recognition allowed Dadini to position himself advantageously before others even recognized that opportunities existed. When famine struck northern Europe, Dadini had already secured grain supplies from southern Italy. When political upheavals disrupted traditional trade routes, he had developed alternative pathways that became immensely valuable. His fellow merchants began seeking his advice not because they liked him personally, but because his insights consistently proved profitable for those who followed them. The process of developing such expertise requires what might be called strategic curiosity, the disciplined pursuit of knowledge that extends beyond your immediate responsibilities. This involves studying the work of masters in your field, understanding the historical context that shaped current practices, and examining case studies of both success and failure. Most importantly, it requires looking beyond your own domain to understand how different fields and disciplines connect. When Filippo Brunelleschi designed the dome of Florence Cathedral, his breakthrough came not from architectural training alone, but from his study of ancient Roman engineering, contemporary shipbuilding techniques, and mathematical principles that had never been applied to construction. This interdisciplinary approach allowed him to solve a problem that had stumped the greatest architects of his time, making him irreplaceable not just as an architect, but as an innovator whose methods could be applied to entirely different challenges. The application of this principle in modern contexts requires identifying the unique combination of skills and knowledge that sets you apart from others who might compete for the same opportunities. This is not about being the best at a single skill, but about being the only person who combines specific capabilities in ways that create distinctive value. The goal is to become what military strategists call a force multiplier, someone whose involvement makes everything else work better. Maria Portinari achieved this status in the Medici Bank through her unique combination of linguistic skills, cultural knowledge, and financial acumen. While other employees could handle transactions in Italian markets, Maria could navigate the complex cultural requirements of conducting business with Byzantine merchants, German princes, and English wool traders. Her ability to communicate effectively across cultural boundaries, combined with her deep understanding of international exchange rates and credit systems, made her invaluable for the bank's expansion into new markets. The second aspect of building indispensability involves what Machiavelli called the wisdom of the serpent, the ability to understand and navigate the hidden currents of human motivation and organizational politics. This is not about manipulation or deception, but about recognizing the often unspoken needs and concerns that drive people's behavior. When you can address these underlying issues, you provide value that goes far beyond your technical contributions.
Niccolò Soderini's success in the Florentine bureaucracy stemmed largely from this capacity.
While his colleagues focused on the explicit requirements of their positions, Soderini paid attention to the implicit challenges that made his superiors' jobs difficult. He noticed that his supervisor spent considerable time managing conflicts between different departments. Rather than simply doing his own work competently, Soderini began identifying potential conflicts before they escalated and proposing procedural changes that reduced friction between teams. This proactive approach to problem-solving made Soderini's supervisor more effective and less stressed, which in turn made Soderini's presence highly valued. When opportunities for advancement arose, Soderini was the obvious choice not because he demanded promotion, but because promoting him clearly benefited everyone involved. His understanding of organizational dynamics had transformed him from a competent employee into an essential asset. The development of this political wisdom requires careful observation of group dynamics and individual behavior patterns. You must learn to distinguish between what people say they want and what they actually need, between official procedures and informal power structures, between public positions and private concerns. This understanding allows you to craft solutions that address multiple levels of needs simultaneously, making your contributions more valuable than those who focus only on surface requirements.
Consider the approach taken by Giuliano de' Medici when he sought to gain influence within the papal court. Rather than competing directly with established courtiers for the Pope's attention, Giuliano studied the broader ecosystem of relationships that shaped papal decisions. He identified that the Pope's secretary, while not highly visible, had significant influence over which matters received serious consideration. Giuliano cultivated a friendship with this secretary not through flattery or gifts, but by consistently providing information that helped the secretary anticipate problems and prepare solutions. This strategy served multiple purposes. It gave Giuliano a channel for influencing papal decisions without appearing to circumvent established procedures. It provided the secretary with resources that enhanced his own effectiveness and status. Most importantly, it demonstrated Giuliano's understanding of how influence actually flowed within the organization, marking him as someone who could be trusted with sensitive responsibilities. The third element of building indispensability involves the strategic sharing of knowledge and recognition. Paradoxically, those who hoard their expertise often find themselves less valued than those who share it generously while maintaining their position as the primary source. When you teach others effectively, you do not diminish your own importance, you expand it by creating a network of people whose success is connected to your contributions. Lorenzo de' Medici mastered this principle in his management of Florence's extensive network of alliances and dependencies. Rather than keeping his diplomatic strategies secret, Lorenzo regularly shared his insights with allied rulers, helping them navigate their own political challenges. This generosity served several functions. It demonstrated his expertise, created obligations among those he helped, and established him as the central node in a network of information sharing that gave him early warning of threats and opportunities throughout Italy. The key to effective knowledge sharing lies in maintaining your role as the source and interpreter of information rather than simply providing raw data. When you help someone understand not just what to do but why specific approaches work in particular circumstances, you create lasting value that cannot be easily replicated by others. Your insights become a framework that guides their thinking rather than a simple solution to a single problem. Building influence through indispensability requires patience and long-term thinking. Unlike tactics based on manipulation or coercion, which can produce immediate results, this approach requires time to demonstrate your value and establish your reputation. However, the influence gained through this method is much more stable and enduring than that achieved through other means. People who respect your competence will continue to seek your involvement even when circumstances change, while those who simply fear your power may abandon you the moment that power appears to weaken. The maintenance of this influence requires continuous learning and adaptation. As situations evolve and new challenges emerge, you must constantly update your knowledge and skills to remain indispensable. This process of ongoing development not only preserves your position but often leads to new opportunities as your growing expertise opens doors that were previously closed. Most importantly, the pursuit of indispensability must be balanced with humility and service to larger purposes. When your goal is genuinely to provide value and solve problems, others will recognize your authenticity and be more willing to support your advancement. When your expertise is deployed in service of worthy goals,
people will actively help you develop new opportunities to apply your skills. The architecture of influence, built upon the foundation of respect, creates a platform from which you can achieve goals that would be impossible through force or manipulation alone. But, like any architecture, it requires ongoing maintenance and thoughtful expansion to remain strong and relevant as circumstances change around it. Part 3, The Mastery of Enduring Power. The final lesson came to Francesco Sforza not in victory, but in the moment of his greatest triumph. After decades of military campaigns, political maneuvering, and careful alliance building, he had finally achieved his ultimate goal. The Duchy of Milan lay in his hands, one of the most powerful territories in all of Italy. Yet as he stood in the ducal palace, surrounded by the trappings of absolute power, Francesco experienced an unexpected revelation that would define the rest of his reign. The revelation came through a conversation with his oldest advisor, a man who had served the previous duke and witnessed the rise and fall of multiple rulers. "Your Grace," the advisor said quietly, "you have achieved what many considered impossible. But now comes the greater challenge, making your power last not just through your lifetime, but beyond it. History is littered with the names of conquerors whose achievements crumbled the moment they could no longer personally maintain them." This observation introduced Francesco to the third and most sophisticated principle that separates temporary dominance from enduring influence: the creation of systems that perpetuate your values and vision independent of your direct control. While the first principle establishes respect through strength and boundaries, and the second builds influence through indispensable competence, the third transforms your impact from personal achievement into institutional legacy. Machiavelli understood that true power lies not in the ability to control events through direct action, but in the capacity to shape the environment within which events occur. This represents the difference between being a player in the game and being the one who sets the rules by which the game is played. Those who master this distinction achieve a form of influence that transcends their physical presence and continues working long after they have moved on to other pursuits. The development of this systemic influence begins with what might be called architectural thinking, the ability to design structures and processes that naturally produce the outcomes you desire. Rather than constantly intervening to correct problems or redirect activities, you create conditions that make success more likely and failure more difficult. This approach requires a deep understanding of human nature, organizational dynamics, and the subtle forces that shape behavior over time. Cosimo de' Medici exemplified this principle throughout his management of Florentine politics. Rather than seeking formal political office, which would have made him a target for rivals, Cosimo created an informal network of obligations and dependencies that gave him more real power than any official position could provide. He systematically identified talented individuals throughout Florentine society and provided them with opportunities, education, or financial support that enabled their advancement. These investments created a cadre of successful citizens whose careers were connected to Cosimo's generosity. As these individuals rose to positions of influence in various guilds, government offices, and cultural institutions, they naturally supported policies that aligned with Cosimo's interests. More importantly, they became advocates for the values and principles that guided Cosimo's approach to governance, spreading his influence throughout Florentine society in ways that no amount of direct political control could have achieved. The genius of this approach lay in its sustainability and self-reinforcement. Each person who benefited from Cosimo's system had incentives to maintain and extend it, as their own success was connected to its continued operation. When new talented individuals emerged, they were naturally drawn into the network through the recommendations and support of existing members. The system grew stronger over time rather than requiring constant energy to maintain, and it survived political upheavals that would have destroyed more centralized forms of power. The creation of such systems requires what Machiavelli called the patience of the gardener, the willingness to plant seeds that will not bear fruit for years or even decades. This long-term perspective distinguishes true leaders from those who merely occupy positions of authority. While short-term thinking focuses on immediate results and direct control, systemic thinking considers how today's actions will shape tomorrow's possibilities and constraints. Isabella d'Este demonstrated this principle in her cultural patronage of Mantua. Rather than simply commissioning artworks for her own enjoyment, Isabella created institutions and traditions that would continue attracting and supporting artistic excellence long after her death. She established workshops where master craftsmen trained apprentices, ensuring the continuation of specific techniques and standards. She created festivals and celebrations that became annual traditions, providing ongoing platforms for artists to display their work and gain recognition. Most significantly, Isabella cultivated relationships with artists, scholars, and cultural figures throughout Europe, making Mantua a center for intellectual exchange that drew talent from across the continent. These relationships created a cultural ecosystem that was largely self-sustaining, as successful artists attracted other talented individuals who wanted to learn from them and collaborate with them. The reputation Isabella built for Mantua continued drawing distinguished visitors and residents for generations after her death. The principles underlying Isabella's success apply equally to organizational leadership, professional relationships, and personal influence networks. The key insight is that sustainable influence comes from creating value for others in ways that naturally align with your own goals and principles. When people benefit from associating with your approach or joining your initiatives, they become advocates for your vision without requiring constant persuasion or management. Building such systems requires a sophisticated understanding of incentive structures and human motivation. You must identify what different types of people truly value, not just what they say they want, but what actually drives their decisions and behavior. This understanding allows you to design opportunities and rewards that appeal to their authentic desires while advancing your broader objectives. Leonardo da Vinci applied this principle in his scientific and artistic work by creating a methodology that could be taught to others and applied to new problems. Rather than simply producing individual masterpieces or inventions, Leonardo developed systematic approaches to observation, experimentation, and creative problem-solving that his students could use in their own work. This methodology became his most enduring contribution, influencing generations of artists, inventors, and scientists who built upon his foundation. The transmission of methodology rather than just results created a form of influence that extended far beyond Leonardo's direct personal impact. Each person who learned his approach became capable of achieving innovations that Leonardo himself might never have considered, yet these innovations carried forward his essential insights about the relationship between art, science, and systematic investigation. The second aspect of creating enduring influence involves what might be called cultural architecture, the deliberate shaping of values, assumptions, and practices that guide behavior within groups and organizations. This is perhaps the most subtle and powerful form of influence, as it operates largely below the level of conscious awareness while profoundly affecting how people think about problems and opportunities. Niccolò Machiavelli himself demonstrated this principle through his writings, which fundamentally altered how subsequent generations thought about political power and leadership. By systematically analyzing the relationship between effectiveness and morality in governance, Machiavelli created new categories of thought that continue shaping political discourse centuries after his death. His influence lies not in specific policy recommendations, which might have become obsolete, but in the analytical framework he provided for thinking about political challenges. The development of cultural influence requires deep insight into the underlying assumptions that shape behavior in your field or organization. What beliefs about success, failure, competition, collaboration, innovation, and tradition guide people's choices? Which of these beliefs serve useful purposes, and which create unnecessary limitations or conflicts? How might alternative frameworks produce better outcomes while honoring legitimate concerns and values? Francesco Dattini achieved remarkable cultural influence within the merchant community of his time by pioneering business practices that balanced profit with ethical considerations. At a time when many merchants viewed business relationships as zero-sum competitions, Dattini demonstrated that mutual benefit was often more profitable than exploitation. He developed accounting methods that provided transparency to partners and clients, created standardized contracts that protected all parties' interests, and established dispute resolution processes that preserved business relationships even when disagreements occurred. These innovations became widely adopted not because Dattini forced their implementation, but because merchants who used his methods found themselves more successful and respected than those who relied on traditional adversarial approaches. The practices spread throughout European commerce as practical advantages rather than moral imperatives, ensuring their adoption even by those who might have resisted purely ethical arguments. The third element of enduring influence involves the strategic development of what might be called succession networks, groups of individuals who are capable of carrying forward your work and extending your influence into new contexts and generations. This goes beyond simple mentorship to include the systematic identification, development, and connection of people who share your core values while bringing their own unique talents and perspectives to common goals.
Lorenzo de' Medici's approach to developing Florentine leadership exemplified this principle.
Rather than simply promoting family members or close personal allies, Lorenzo actively sought out talented individuals from diverse backgrounds and provided them with education, opportunities, and guidance that prepared them for significant responsibilities. He created a culture within Florentine leadership that valued merit, learning, and service to the common good over narrow personal interests. The individuals Lorenzo developed went on to lead Florence through various challenges and opportunities, maintaining the stability and prosperity that made the city a model for other Italian states. More importantly, they established precedents and institutions that continued shaping Florentine governance long after the Medici family's direct political control had ended. The principles Lorenzo championed became embedded in the city's political culture, influencing decision-making processes and leadership selection for generations. Creating effective succession networks requires a delicate balance between guidance and independence. You must provide enough structure and support to help emerging leaders develop their capabilities, while allowing enough freedom for them to adapt your principles to new circumstances and contribute their own insights. The goal is not to create copies of yourself, but to develop individuals who can carry forward your essential values while bringing fresh perspectives and capabilities to emerging challenges. The maintenance of enduring influence also requires what Machiavelli termed the wisdom of the phoenix, the ability to periodically renew and adapt your systems and approaches to remain relevant as circumstances change. Even the most carefully designed structures will eventually require modification as new challenges emerge and existing solutions become obsolete.
Those who achieve lasting influence are those who build adaptation and evolution into their systems from the beginning.
This adaptive capacity requires ongoing attention to feedback from the environment and willingness to modify approaches that are no longer serving their intended purposes. It means staying connected to new developments in your field, remaining open to insights from younger or less experienced individuals, and being willing to abandon practices that have become counterproductive even when they were previously successful. Pope Julius II demonstrated this adaptive wisdom throughout his papacy by continuously adjusting his strategies to meet changing political and military circumstances. While maintaining his core commitment to strengthening papal authority and territorial integrity, Julius modified his alliances, tactics, and priorities as new threats and opportunities emerged. His ability to remain flexible in method while staying true to fundamental objectives allowed him to achieve goals that would have been impossible through rigid adherence to any single approach. The ultimate expression of enduring influence lies in creating changes that become so thoroughly integrated into existing systems that they appear natural and inevitable. When your innovations become the way things are done rather than the way that person did things, you have achieved a form of influence that transcends personal recognition while creating lasting positive impact. This level of integration requires patience, humility, and a genuine commitment to purposes larger than personal advancement. The changes you seek to create must serve real needs and provide authentic benefits that others can recognize and appreciate. When your improvements become indispensable parts of how people accomplish their goals, they will be preserved and extended even when the original context that inspired them has disappeared. The mastery of enduring power represents the culmination of Machiavellian wisdom applied to the challenge of creating positive and lasting change in the world. It transforms the pursuit of personal respect and influence into a vehicle for broader contribution that benefits not only yourself but the communities and institutions you touch. In achieving this transformation, you discover that the greatest respect comes not from what others must give you, but from what you are able to give to others through the wise application of your strength, competence, and vision. The principles that make others respect you rather than take advantage of you ultimately serve purposes far greater than personal protection or advancement. They provide the foundation for leadership that elevates everyone involved while creating legacies that endure long after individual careers have ended. In mastering these principles, you join the ranks of those who have learned to wield influence not as a weapon for personal gain, but as a tool for building better worlds. It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both. But it is best of all to be respected, for respect encompasses both fear of your strength and love of your contributions, creating loyalty that endures through changing circumstances and serves purposes worthy of your highest aspirations. The enduring wisdom of Niccolò Machiavelli, adapted for those who would build rather than merely conquer.